Huh? Wow, I have to give a anti-professionalism talk, like from a very professional space. This is really weird for me. So my name is Daniel. I'm a sociologist here. I am a critical race scholar. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But so here, just to kind of talk about professionalism and what is professionalism and how can we debunk professionalism is sort of where I want to go. And I want us to, as we go through today, I want us to think about professionalism as a narrative that controls our lives. And I want us to sort of interrogate the importance of that narrative and the way that we might be able to remove that narrative from our sense of self. I feel like it's quite damning and quite problematic, right? When we attach this sense of professionalism to who we are. So I want to go through some things here and just kind of debunk things. I also want to know who's in the room. So if can we just do like quick intros? Can you tell me who you are and like why you're here? And if you're on Zoom, if you can kind of throw that in the chat, it'd be awesome. I'd move the mic, but I can't move the mic. It's like tied to the ground. It's like forcing me to be professional. Oh, there's a movable mic. Perfect. Great.
So my name's Sarah. I'm a sociology major here at Pacific. And I guess for me, the word professionalism gets thrown around a lot, but it's really hard to come to bring it down to a definition of what professionalism means, especially because it can mean different things in different work settings.
Hi, I'm Rudy Sanchez. I'm an alum of Pacific and an academic and career advisor here. And I guess professionalism to me just means having a sense of, knowing the, I guess, using a sociological term, the habitus of the workplace and just knowing the norms and ins and outs of the everyday in your environment.
Hi there, Mike Shingle, Director of Academic and Career Advising. And I think my goal today for myself is to understand professionalism more through a student lens, but then also a lens where I'm supervising a team and what my, I guess, vision for supervising is and how it could possibly be modified based off of what I learned today.
It's a lot of pressure.
Hi, my name is Charlie. I am a student worker for academic and career advising. I'm also a senior psychology student here at Pacific. Yeah, I thought that this workshop would be really interesting. I guess I never really thought of what professionalism really means. And I just thought it would be really interesting.
I'm Dylan Hansen. I'm a senior social work student. And I was recently, like 2 years ago, it was brought to my attention that I could choose to not believe in things.
Yes.
And professionalism was at the top of my list of things to not believe in. And as a poor person, it's done nothing but cause me a lot of problems. Just pick an area and I probably find a problem professionalism created. And interestingly enough, social work has a lot to say about that. And just reading that literature kind of brought it to my attention. And that's been something that I've been really chewing on throughout the bulk of my practicum this year.
Hi, I'm Zach. I'm a film major. I'm here because I'm in a junior seminar class, and this talk sounded interesting and aligned with my schedule. I guess the idea I have for professionalism, I picture the man in the suit and tie, or the woman in the pantsuit who's always on top of everything and has a planner, stuff like that. So I don't know, I'm interested to seeing what this is all about. Yeah.
Hi, Vanessa Reyes, Community Relations Coordinator in the ACA. I'm really excited for this presentation. For me, mine's a little bit more of a personal story. I love my hair. It's a part of me. And I think for so long, it took me a long time to embrace my hair texture in like the professional world, where a lot of times where there's these unsaid things about people with more textured hair and it being quote unquote appropriate for the work environment.
Yeah. Which, if we could just stop believing in professionalism, right, would like really open up a lot of freedom there. We're checking in on Zoom as well.
Nothing in the chat at this time.
Okay, cool. So yeah, I think that's where I want to go. I want to go into the place where we don't actually have to believe in professionalism. You know, like there's this moment as I was walking here to do this, I got stuck, not stuck. We just had a department meeting, and then after that, I was talking to one of my colleagues, and I was like, "Oh, it's almost 1 o'clock." I'm like, I need to go. Like, I have to go do this talk on professionalism, and I left my colleague's office about 12:55 or so, and I found myself like rushing to get here, and there was this like really clear moment of this walk where I had to say, "There's no reason for me to rush here." Right? Like I could actually stop and I could be really mindful and I could be really present and like not run to the NPR to make sure that this thing starts at 1. And then when I do that, right, I can come here and I can show up and I'm not like out of breath and I'm not like, where am I? I'm not like scattered, right? Because professionalism might actually look like me walking slower here and us starting a little later, for me to be like fully centered and really prepared and grounded, right, in what I'm doing here. As compared to rushing here and getting here at at like 4 minutes early or something like that, so that I could start right on 1 and then we could be perfectly fine, right? That would be the sort of the dominant narrative that we have about professionalism, is like, you didn't start on time, there's something wrong with you, right? So I want us to rethink professionalism and think about what is professionalism? How do we think about it? What are the narratives that we use to understand it? And then at the end, I also want to sort of offer an alternative narrative to what we could use as professionalism. So, this is my slide. I usually don't teach with slides, so it was also really weird for me to put slides together. And it was this like really interesting, I just feel like this is a meta like experience about professionalism and who am I and how do I present myself. So there's really bare minimum on the slides, because that's kind of me trying to push back on this as well. But this looks like a general slide that we might start a presentation with, right? There's like a title, there is my name. I also have my credentials on there, and I'm like, this is also who I am and what I do, right? I'm an associate professor of sociology. And I want us to deconstruct that a little bit and think about that, because maybe it'll work. There we go. Like, is this professional? Or like, is it professional for me to have all of that on the slide? Like, is this necessary? Like, maybe my name is necessary, right? So like, you at least kind of know who I am. But how much of this other stuff is actually necessary on the slide? Professionalism tells me that I have to have all this on the slide, because professionalism, right, gets tied to credentialism. As it gets tied to credentialism, it says, if I can put these magic letters after my name, right, that there's something, like I become more worthy. It proves me more as a person, it proves me more as a professional because I've got some credentials. And I want us to think about, like, is that really professionalism that's working here, or is this an exertion of power? As a sociologist, I'm very interested in power. I'm very interested in the way that power runs through our lives, and it dictates our lives, and it shapes the narratives that we work through. So I think it's important for us to question even the small things that we do here, right? Like when I put my name and my credentials and my position up there, like, is that really professionalism? Or is it really an exertion of power? Because as I put that up there, what do I hope to get from that? Right? What often comes from that is I hope that we're told, right, if I put that up there, I can come up here and I can speak, and then y'all were going to believe whatever I say. And what if professionalism, right, wasn't about throwing credentials around? What if professionalism wasn't about me exerting my own power so that you believe me, but about like the ways that I carry myself in ways that align with issues of like equity and justice, so that I gain your trust and I gain your sense of community and I gain your ability to hear what I'm saying through what I'm doing in the way that I carry myself. And that doesn't require me, right, to put my credentials up there. And you might be thinking like, okay, well that makes sense. But additionally to that, right, I don't also have to like come with the suit. I don't have to come with the tie. Right? I don't have to, I don't know, like I'm literally wearing like yoga pants, okay? And like I've got like athletic wear, right? Like this is how I show up for classes. And I think for a long time it was like, this isn't professional. Right? You can see like other, sometimes at other institutions or like other colleagues or whatnot, right? Not necessarily at Pacific, but just in general, right? They'll be like, oh, so you're like dressed down today, so it's not a teaching day. As if like the ways in which that I show up in my body and the ways that I clothe myself, right, affect the ways that I teach or the things that I can say or the things that I should be credible for. And I think that's one way that professionalism harms us. It tells us that we only can show up behind our credentials. We can only show up in certain ways. And that's the only way that we can be listened to. So I want us to let go of the belief in professionalism. I want us to sort of like let that go completely. And that's where we're going to go here. So like, who am I, right? I think that's, I also don't stand at podiums very often, but there we go. But who am I, right? And I think this is an important question. I'm like, who am I? And what professionalism wants me to do is to leave so much of this at the door. Right? To open that door and say, all I am is one or two things. I'm the letters after my name. I'm a sociologist and I'm a critical race scholar. Right? It doesn't want you to know, like I graduated from the University of Hawaii. It doesn't want you to know that I'm a millennial. It doesn't want you to know that I live in Forest Grove, that I play bagpipes, that I played bagpipes in Buckingham Palace at one point in my life, that I'm trying to learn how to play guitar, that I'm a Virgo, that I'm an only child, that I'm Filipino, Scottish, Swedish, Jewish, German, that I'm trying to raise a child beyond the gender binary right now. A 2-year-old, right, who was born during the pandemic. Doesn't want you to know that I have photography as a hobby, that was born and raised in Hawaii, that I graduated from Campbell High School, that growing up in Hawaii, that was also on Ewa Beach, that I played football growing up, that I played soccer growing up, that I'm a 3rd-degree black belt in karate, that I play in a flag football league in Portland, right? It doesn't want any of that in the space. This is what professionalism tells us. Professionalism tells us that we are workers, and the only thing that we bring through the door are the things that are relevant to work. Right? So professionalism says, don't show up as this. Right? As you walk through the door, cross all of that out and just be that. And I think that's the harm of professionalism. Is it makes us believe that we can separate work and life. It makes us, it wants us to believe, right, that like the issues that you have at home, the issues that you have I mean, even that's a privileged statement there, like the issues that you have beyond work. Not everyone has a home, unfortunately. But the issues that you have outside of work, right, have to be left at the doors of the workplace. So if you're having trouble with family, if you're having trouble with your own health, you have to check all of that at the door and come in and put on the professional face so that you can be the most productive, efficient worker for capitalism. And you know, I wonder, right, what the world would look like if we didn't have to do all of that. Right? What would the world look like if we did not have to check ourselves at the door? Right? If professionalism didn't tell us that we had to fit into a really narrow space. Would I, and I don't want to be neoliberal in this, but to some degree, if I didn't have to check all of that, I might actually be a more productive worker. That shouldn't be the goal of why we should let all this in, is so that we can all be more productive workers. That's still a really neoliberal approach to this, and still reduces us to workers. And I think we are much more than our status as workers. And our value as humans is not tied, right, to our production, to the things that we produce and the things that we do, right? It is tied to our inherent nature as humans and our own inherent worthiness. So I want us to not necessarily just like sit here and listen to a debate about professionalism and kind of like debunk all of that. I want us to sort of embody that and work through that as much as possible. So 2, 4, 6, yeah, we've got an even number here, which is perfect. So a lot of the work that I do, right, is also in anti-racist work. It's in community building work. And a core part of that is really about connection. So I want us to think about professionalism. I kind of want us to move us into what we call a constructivist listening dyad. So dyads have two roles in them, right? The first role is the speaker, and the second role is the listener. When you are the listener, right, your role, or what we are asking you to do, is really to just listen. All right, so think about the things that you do when you listen. And what we're going to do is we're not actually going to respond to what the speaker is sharing. We're going to sit there, we're going to listen to what is being shared, and like leave it at that. We're not going to respond to it, so we're not going to ask questions about it. We're not going to validate it or anything like that. We're just fully being present in the moment, and we are listening to what this person is sharing, and we are sort of being witness to this person's truth. So as if you are the listener in this, right, then do not ask questions or respond to what the speaker is sharing with you. When you are the speaker, what we are asking you to do is to respond to the prompt. And you've got that time, whatever time we set, that's fully for you. You have the entire time to respond. There's no right or wrong answers, right? So go wherever it takes you. Sometimes I was just doing this in a class earlier, but often when we speak, right, we're often looking for validation from other people. We're looking for the nods, we're looking for the questions, we're looking for the things that say we are sharing the right things. And I want us to kind of work through letting go of that just a little bit, or give you a little taste of what could be possible if we let that go through a dyad space, right, where where the listener that you're partnered with is hopefully, right, going to try to lean into this practice as much as possible, and not respond to you, right? Not validate what you're sharing, and not like nod and tell you that you're on the right path. They're going to simply listen and hear what you have to share and sit there with it, right? And be a part of you shaping your own narrative, which I think, again, is really powerful, because professionalism is an external narrative that wants to shape how we present ourselves. So it becomes an anti-oppressive practice, right, for us to attempt to name our own narratives. We're going to talk about narratives in a little bit here, so it'll all hopefully come together. And then the last thing is that the dyad space is confidential. So the dyad space is purely confidential. Whatever gets shared in the dyad space stays in the dyad space, which means that when you leave, right, if we do a dyad, and if you leave, if you see that person later in like lunch, or you see them on campus, you're not allowed to like ask them about the things that they shared. That space is confidential. Once we close it, it's closed. If you have an urge that you're like, I really have to talk to that person about that, one, that probably says more about like your own interest. And I really encourage you to dig into that and think about what it's bringing up for you. And then maybe go talk to someone else about what's coming up for you and why you need to process that. In the case that you're like, I just really can't let this go, like I said, really try to let it go. If you want to talk to someone about something that they shared in a dyad, you have to ask for permission to do that. Right? So you have to say, hey, you shared this thing in our dyad. I'm wondering if you want to talk more about that. Do you have capacity for that? And this is where I give you all permission to say no. You do not have to accept that invitation, right? You can say no, and no is a complete sentence. Right? No is a complete sentence. It does not need justification. And I think this is also to tie this back to professionalism, right? There are ways that we force people to kind of divulge information and tell us more than they're willing to tell us in the name of professionalism as well. Right? We think of professionalism around the idea of like being a team player. And there's nothing wrong with being a team player, but when being a team player is situated around this idea of you're not allowed to say no, or that if you say no to something, you have to have a really good excuse to say no to it, right? Which means that you have to tell everything that you want to tell, like, or you have to justify your no. And I want us to sort of think about like consent and building a consent culture and whatnot, right? And no is a complete sentence. So if you all could partner up, if you could find a partner, we'll set this dyad up and we will explore sort of this first one. So if you have a partner that you can chat with. Yeah, so if you can put people in. Okay, and then if you are on Zoom, we will put you in breakout rooms. All right, looks like we have partners. I need a clock here. Okay, so we're gonna give each speaker a minute here, and so the prompt, right, that we respond to is, if you really knew me, you would know. So again, we'll give everyone a minute, right? I will time, I will tell you when to stop, I will tell you when to switch roles. The question is, if you really knew me, you would know. And I will never ask people in my audience or in my classes to do something that I wouldn't do. So I can model what this looks like, right? So here's a minute, right? If you really knew me, you would know that like I was born in Hawaii. And that like my roots are in Hawaii and I feel quite connected to Hawaii. And recently my parents moved up to Oregon from Hawaii because we had a child, right? And we weren't gonna move back to Hawaii. So also that's been a really interesting experience, is to attempt to raise a child beyond the gender binary. In the pandemic this is a really privileged thing to say, has been kind of a really nice thing, because we haven't had to have them around a lot of people, which means that there's not a lot of like gender things being placed upon my child, which means that they can live sort of beyond the binary, which has been really amazing. And so at the same time, my parents have moved up here because of that. And I haven't been back home in a long time, and for a lot of my time up here while I lived in Oregon, just having parents back home in Hawaii were sort of my root, right? It gave me sort of it was like, yes, I am still rooted there, and having them up here now is really different because I don't have that anchor back home. So it's a little bit of an identity crisis. So all of that, obviously, in the sake of professionalism, right? I'm not supposed to share any of that with you according to the rules of professionalism. So I want us to sort of, anyways, where we're going, right, is I want you to sort of see what that's kind of like to some degree. But if you really knew me, you would know. If everyone can choose a number between 1 and 50, and the person whose number is closest to 32, you will be my first speaker. So figure out whose number is closest to 32. If you are closest to 32, you are my first speaker. And the question to you is, if you really knew me, you would know, starting now. So that's my minute there. So we can wrap those up. You can thank your partner for sharing. You can thank your partner for listening at this point, and then we will switch. So if you were the listener, right, your job now is to be the speaker. As the speaker, also I want to go back to this idea of confidentiality as well. If you are the second speaker, your job is not to respond to anything that the person just shared with you. So you can't say like, oh, you shared this, and that reminds me of this. Like, you're still answering the question on your own foundation, right? So don't respond to what the first speaker shared. You're answering the question on your own, which is, if you really knew me, you would know. And I'm going to start that timer for a minute for our second speaker, starting right now. All right, so that's a minute again. So again, wrap those up. You can share for, thank your partner for listening, thank your partner for sharing, all of that. So I just want to open the space up here, right? To kind of debrief that and think about what that was like for you. Yeah, because we are, like, as you enter into this space, right? this isn't fully a social space. This is still kind of a presentation. It's still an academic space. It still feels like, to some degree, it is ruled by the hegemony of professionalism. So I just want to check in and see if people have reactions to that, thoughts on that experience.
So speaking for me, I was aware of the dynamic that I and I started to find myself getting into a space. I wanted to continue to have that. So I feel like I want to reflect more on my desire and need for the vulnerable, while also like
So it sounded like at the beginning there's maybe some hesitance to get into that vulnerable place. And yeah. Do you have thoughts on the other side of that power dynamic? You don't have to answer. I'm just. Because I think power plays out everywhere, right? And as we enter into these spaces, we're constantly navigating those power dynamics, and that's kind of what professionalism also tells us to do. Is says you're supposed to be in a position of power, or you're in a position of subordination. So that's got to dictate what you can and you cannot share. And I think it's interesting, right? Because like, what if we let go of some of those narratives or those symbolic boundaries that we had, right, between supervisor and worker, right? Like, what if I could tell my supervisors more about my personal life? It requires a degree of trust that the supervisor wouldn't use that information against me through their power. And on the other side of that, it requires a degree of trust to employee or worker, right? That you won't use the information that you have on me to undermine my ability to lead. Right? And as we think about professionalism, I want us to like think, what would happen, right, if professionalism wasn't defined by rules of what you could or couldn't share? But what if professionalism was defined by rules of community building and trust? Like, what would our working relationships look like if we could build that mutual trust and we could share those things that professionalism currently tells us not to share, right? Everything that's on that slide that I said, this is me, and I'm like, I'm not supposed to be all those things. If you could know all those things about me, right, how would our relationships differ? So like, what if we let go of professionalism as show up a certain way and respect certain rules around sharing, but really built and measured professionalism as degrees of trust? And I think it would transform the workplace. And I think that pushes the idea of professionalism closer to ideas of equity and justice, and removes it, right, away from things like gatekeeping. Like, I trust that when I come here and I don't dress in the professional way that we envision professionalism, that the people who sit in front of me or the people who sit in my classes won't use that against me, that they'll still be able to listen or attempt to listen to what I have to say and attempt to engage with me, right? And perhaps that's what professionalism looks like. I could debrief this interaction here all day as a sociologist, but I also want to make sure that we open up the space as well to other people's reactions and thoughts on the dyad space, and really just kind of being vulnerable and sharing, you know, around this question of if you really knew me, you would know. Yeah, go for it. I don't know if I'm just going to interrupt real quickly. I don't know if I'm fully like know what you're talking about when you say motivational interview. I wonder if you can define that for us.
Yeah, so real basically there's sort of two streams of purpose. One is like a productive one, and I don't even know if productive is the right way, but there's one in which I'm moving towards something that I think talk about. And there's one that might be filling in the gaps because I'm uncomfortable, so I need to talk about it. And so motivational interviewing is really you know, it's sort of my job as a professional. Like, oh, it obviously sounds like you feel like you sort of that. And yeah, we're talking about your mind, that's cool too, and that matters too, but like this is sort of a and so like really sort of just kind of dig into that. I would kind of 3-hour potential and that introduced the concept of like neutrality, which is taking a step back from that professional relationship in which you tell me everything. But that's just flat out stressing, right? Like people can't open up about traumatic experiences. And so I've been sort of introduced to that concept of neutrality, and people share things with me if it's appropriate, that they give me permission also sharing something like trading that way, which I think is interesting, but never once were we really ever instructed to just like sit. And I think that that's what it's especially if it is about what I talk about.
And in the dyad space, right, hopefully the reciprocity comes from the turn taking, right? But yeah, thanks for sharing that. And also just as, you know, meta-analysis here, right? Like professionalism tells me like what professionalism tells me that I'm supposed to do up here when you're like, when you share and you're like, you know, it's like motivational interviewing. Is that what you said? Sorry. Thank you. I'm also not supposed to do that, right? But like, this is what professionalism tells me. I'm supposed to like sit up here and go like, yeah, that's great. Yeah. And like not ask, right? Because I'm not supposed to not know. And I'm supposed to like put on this air of knowing. So as you talk about something that I have no idea about, I'm just supposed to like I have the power of the room as the speaker here. I'm supposed to just like nod along and say like, yeah, I know what you're talking about, and pretend. Because what I'm not supposed to do for professionalism, right, is be vulnerable. I'm not supposed to say, I don't know. Professionalism is so caught up in perfectionism, right, that I'm supposed to know everything, that I'm supposed to have all the answers. And again, I'm going to protect my power so that you all don't undermine it. And hopefully, right, like as we shift the idea of professionalism away from rules into ideas of trust, we can build spaces, right, where it's like, it's okay if my supervisor doesn't know all the answers. Like no one can know all the answers. We're not robots, right? We don't like download programs and have all the answers. And I can actually appreciate when the person in power can pause and say like, I actually don't know what you're talking about. Can you teach me about that? And we can break out of perfectionism, right? Perfectionism is the idea that there's only one right way to do things. And when we look at racism and sexism and classism, like so much of that, there's only one right way to do things is built into those systems of oppression. And all of those things tell us like you have to assimilate. You have to assimilate to being the right kind of person. And professionalism runs a similar course, right? It says to be a good worker, to be an efficient worker, you have to be a right kind of person. And everything will just go smoothly if you assimilate to that. And we assume that our assimilation to professionalism actually just makes us more productive. And maybe it does. But I think the main the question that poses as well is also at what cost? At what cost does that make us more productive workers? Like, what do we lose, right, by being more productive in those ways? What do we lose when we assimilate to this idea of professionalism? And it's going to lead us into our next question here. But I also want to pause and see if there's other comments on this last sort of dyad space. I pause for uncomfortably long times when I ask questions. Not because I'm like forcing you all to participate. That's not the goal there. But I pause for long periods of time because I think professionalism also wants us to work in speed and efficiency, right? It wants us to ask a question, have an answer, make a request, have that thing met right away. And that sense of speed and that sense of urgency is quite problematic because, again, that's part of this assimilation project, I think. Right? There are ways that many of us, when asked the question, like we need a lot of time to think and process. And sometimes English isn't our first language. So if we are going to speak publicly, we like sit there and we're like, I have this thought and I want to share this, but I also have to make sure I share it the correct way. Like all of that's professionalism as well, and perfectionism. But also, so those are my long pauses, right? Is to make space for those kinds of processes, those kinds of internal thoughts that happen. They're not like a way of exerting power to force you all to participate. So I think that's another way, right, of thinking about professionalism is as a professional, professionalism often tells me that I'm not supposed to let you see behind the scenes. I'm just supposed to do what I do, and then that's going to come across as really like assertive and as if I know what I'm doing. And again, right, if we're building professionalism around trust, perhaps something that I have to think about is that it may actually be more professional to let you see behind the scenes. Right, and I pull from like Irving Goffman is a sociologist, and he talks about dramaturgy, and he talks about how we always like put on performances, and like what happens if I let go of the performance of professionalism and let you see behind the scenes. So I let you know about the rationales for why I pause. I let you know about the rationales for why I share what I share. I let you know the rationales for the reasons that I dress the way that I dress. Let's see. I've talked around this a lot. I just want to put some clear words here to it. But professionalism is I view professionalism as a narrative. It is a socially constructed narrative, right? That masquerades as an objective and rational list of traits that make one fit for the workplace. That's my own definition of it. That's what I would say. It is socially constructed. By socially constructed, I mean we make it up. Somewhere it was made up. We continuously agree that that's the thing that we should continue to do. And when we see that they're made up, I think it gives us the opportunity, right? Or it gives us permission to some degree to say, like, I'm not going to believe in that thing that was made up. Like, I'm actually going to let it go. And it's okay for us to let it go because it was made up by someone at some point. So it's socially constructed, which means we could let it go. We could also, it also means that we can change it. Right? There's a lot of fluidity in socially constructed terms. And as a sociologist and a micro level sociologist, like everything is socially constructed. But the danger, and the postmodernist in me says that the danger here is that although it is a socially constructed narrative, it masquerades itself as objective. And it hides the fact that it was socially constructed. So it wants us to believe that these are true facts that make us better workers. And when we frame professionalism, right, as the conditions that create effective work, it ignores human diversity. Right? And it masks the way that the idea of professional really reinforces various forms of oppression. I don't have an answer to this, but like, this is a question I think I pose to everyone here, right? Is what is professionalism? When you think of professionalism, what comes to mind? So earlier, right, it reminds me of like the suit and tie, right? When you hear professionalism, what other things come to mind? So it's a barrier. No. And I guess what is the image that pops up when you see, when I say professionalism, what's the image that pops up that makes it feel like, or makes it, I don't want to say feels, that makes it a barrier? Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, like embedded in that, I also think there's, or what I'm hearing, right, is a lot of like tone policing to some degree, especially around the like screaming or crying or being really angry, right? Is if someone comes in, like we tell people, I'm not allowed to hear you unless you speak in this way, which means I don't want you to raise your voice. I don't want you to be crying. I don't want to hear anger in your voice. I want you to come in and be like really calm and cool and collected. And like, that's the only way that we can actually hear your problem. Right? And it's tone policing, right? It is, Now, like I said in the last slide, right, that professionalism mirrors other forms of oppression. So like how many times, right, have women been told, you're hysterical, you need to calm down, right? I can't, like, why are you being so crazy? Right? Or like people of color have been told, why are you so mad? Why are you yelling? And are told that the only way that our concerns and our needs and our wants can be heard is when we express them in a very neat, calm, cool, and collected package. So there's ways, right, that when we look at the constraints of professionalism, like mirror those constraints of racism and sexism. And one of the dangers, right, around professionalism is we act as if professionalism isn't race, class, gendered, sexed, and all of those other things. Like this just makes a good worker, as if a worker is a completely neutral body that exists outside of all other social identities. So when we think of professionalism, there's a way to speak, right? Metered voice, calm, quiet, no anger, no emotion, right? Like I said earlier, check all that at the door. And some of it's not just the way you speak, but also the words that you use as well. So professionalism tells me that I shouldn't speak in slang. It tells me that I shouldn't swear, which I'm really surprised I have not sworn like this. What's it been? It's like almost an hour and I have not sworn. This is amazing. I think it's the podium that makes me really conscious of this. But yeah, I'm not supposed to say yeah, right? I'm supposed to say yes. I'm not supposed to say, I'm not supposed, again, like think of all of these things that I'm doing in my body right now that's like very unprofessional, or at least according to like the dominant narratives of professionalism. So it's tone of voice, it's the words that you use and the way that you pronounce words, right? You have to fit in and use this like middle class discourse. You have to have the right words and say the right words. Which is really interesting because if you think about, if I say yeah in a meeting, you know what I mean. Like, you know that when I say yeah, that means yes. And you can translate that in your head. We all have to translate your yes into yeah, or whatever other language we speak. So like you can translate our slang into, because you know what we're talking about. So there's way that we're, yeah. There's no dumb comments. Right, like, do I write hey or hi or dear or to whom it may concern, or like, do I put a date on this? I mean, obviously, an email you don't put a date on it, but like, it's fascinating in that space, I think, because we think that professionalism makes us more efficient workers. But like, how much of our cognitive capacity is being used, and time, like really like time, right, is being used sitting there going, I typed hey, no, I delete that. Now I'm going to type hi, and I'll type the rest of the email. I'm going to go back to that part, and I'm going to put dear. Like, we spend so much time trying to fit into the ideas of professionalism because we're afraid, because we don't have the trust, right? We're afraid that someone's going to use that against us to prove that we are imperfect. But surprisingly, we're all imperfect.
Or like how many
Oh my gosh.
you're not
not too eager, and like so many explanation points, right? Like I'm not too eager, and I'm also not too angry. Yeah. And so I also coach for the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development, and they have a faculty success program, and we work through writing productivity and work-life balance. And I coach multiple groups every term. So it's like I'm working with 12 different faculty across the nation, each term. And one of the things that takes up so much of faculty's time, which might be surprising to students, is email. And not like responding to the vast amount of email, but the amount of time that people are sitting there going, did I word that correctly? Did I use that word correct, right? Should I rephrase this? How is this going to be read? Like they know what they want to say, but they're doing like this very, very deep and time-consuming and emotionally and psychologically draining process of, is this professional enough? And this is happening across the board. And then it's also amplified for people in marginalized statuses, right? People of color are really afraid of the ways that this is going to get read. Women are very afraid of the ways that this is going to get read. Women of color, right? We start to look at intersections and we start to see how all of this gets amplified. Junior faculty really afraid of that, right? Of how will senior faculty or admin read this? Yeah, I think I don't know if they struggle with text messages as well. I personally don't struggle with text message. I just like shoot off a text. If you get a text back from me, that's kind of my own issue though. But yeah, I think that the core of this, right, is there's these like archaic ways of thinking about language and what language has to look like. And again, I think professionalism we can expand it to relationship building. So like in the first time I email someone, like, yeah, I'm probably going to put a salutation. I should put a salutation in there. As we build that relationship though, right, then do I have to stay within that professional? I don't know, right? I don't necessarily have the answer to that. And I think why I don't have an answer to that is because I don't think professionalism is something that we should have hard and fast rules about. I think that professionalism has to be contained within the relationships that we have. So how are we speaking? What kinds of language will we use and whatnot? And I think that's really important. Or that's important for us to negotiate with whoever we're in relationship with. Often what happens though, right, is the request for professionalism comes from the position of power. And it becomes an exertion of power. It becomes the request of, I will only hear you if you meet these criteria. Which again, right, is so damaging when you think about how that extends other forms of oppression. It's the same thing. like heterosexual people say to LGBTQ plus IA plus people, individuals, right? It's the same thing that cis individuals say to trans or queer folk. It's the same thing that white individuals say to BIPOC individuals. It's like, I can only hear you if you meet my criteria. So it's a way of like planting the flag, right? And saying, we run by these rules. And it's okay to run by those rules because they work for me. And if you want to make it assimilate into this form of power. Now, I don't want us to say like we can just, I don't want everyone to leave and say like, fuck it, I don't have to be professional. There, I swore. But I don't want us to like leave and just like say like, I don't have to be professional. That's not where I want us to leave. I think in an ideal world, we could say that and say like, professionalism is dead and we're getting rid of it. Or we're birthing a new form of professionalism around trust and relationship and community building. But we still live in the broader world that is defined by professionalism. So I don't want us to go out and say like, I'm never doing professionalism again. What I want us to do, though, right, is realize that professionalism is a narrative and a power play that controls our lives. Or at least in our conceptualization of professionalism around the like suit and tie, the way that I'm supposed to speak, the words that I'm supposed to use, the ways that I'm supposed to dress, the ways that I'm supposed to like carry myself, or like, am I supposed to slouch? Am I not supposed to slouch? How am I supposed to shake your hand? All of that stuff, right? Is a power play. And I want us to know that the world is unfortunately defined by a lot of those things. So when you think about that, that means that professionalism is a narrative. It's a narrative of power that we all have to know about so that we can navigate an oppressive system. It doesn't make professionalism, or it doesn't make those elements of professionalism like justifiable, but it is helpful for us to know that they exist. And it's helpful for us to know, just like other groups of marginalized individuals, what code switching looks like and how we can code switch. And to know when we have to code switch. And to know that when we code switch, right, that says nothing about our sense of self. Like, it says nothing about us, it says nothing about our worthiness, it says nothing about our type of work, our ability to work, really does not say anything about us. It is a strategy that we engage in to survive an oppressive world. But so often we think of professionalism as a trait, and a trait that is easily adaptable for most people to take on. So what happens, right, is if you don't meet those criteria, then we have all this like imposter syndrome and negative self-talk that comes in and says, I can't meet these things of professionalism. There's something wrong about me. I'm not good enough because I'm not professional enough. And I want us to take away, right? I think a main takeaway here is that if you are not professional enough, I don't really believe that says anything about you. I think it says a lot about the world that you exist within and its inability to make room for you and the diversity and the quality of thought that you bring to that space. And when people critique you on your lack of professionalism, again, that probably says less about your worthiness and your sense of self. And it says more about their relationship to the concept of professionalism. So when they critique you on professionalism, this is easier said than done, right? To remind yourself, there's actually nothing wrong with me. Because often, like when we're looking at the ways that we speak, the ways that we dress, the ways that we carry ourselves and all of that, that is so tied to culture, and it's tied to the social spaces and the social identities that we have. And what oppression wants us to do is to believe that our cultures and our identities are not worthy of civic inclusion. Because there's something flawed, inherently flawed about the kinds of people that we are. And I want us to separate, right? The idea that professionalism tells us anything about ourselves. If you get critiqued on your lack of professionalism, and I'm not talking about like egregious like cases of lack of professionalism, right? Like where you just like completely disregard a process and go rogue and do whatever you want, right? Like I'm not talking about just like throwing a hiring process completely out the window and saying like, I think I'm going to do this instead. Like I'm not talking about those kinds of things, right? I'm talking about the like, I don't know how to send, I use the right words, I don't use the right speech patterns, I don't dress the right way. When people critique you on your lack of professionalism in that space and in that capacity, if you can remember anything from this, I want you to remember, right? That says nothing about you. It says more about that person's relationship to power and their relationship to the power that they gain from the concept of professionalism than it does about you as a human and about you as your worth. And if you can do that with professionalism, I encourage you to extend that out to beyond professionalism as well. That when you experience racism, the experience of racism says less about you and your self-worth, and it says more about the person engaging in racism's relationship to racism. So it says more about the actor than about you as the receiver. When you experience sexism, it says more about that person's relationship to sexism and willingness to align themselves with sexism than it says anything about your own self-worth or your own worthiness. I've actually kind of like skipped through a bunch of slides with that. But are there other things that come to mind when we think of professionalism? I think we've I think the big takeaway here, right, is as you like if you free wrote and you said, here are all of the components of professionalism that I see, if you could sit with that, right, and look at that and say, who am I describing? Right? Like, am I describing myself? Am I describing someone else? And really try to put a picture, like if you had to go on Google and like find an image of the person that you're describing with all of these things, like what would that person look like? Right? Like what is the race, class, gendered, sexed, like body that you are conjuring in that description? For a lot of us, right, it is a heterosexual, cisgendered, white, middle class man. So think about that, right? And like, how can we make that more complex? Because if we can make that picture of professionalism more complex, it makes room for other people to show up in professional spaces and not feel like they have to leave a lot at the door. I was going to do this as a dyad. I think for time, I'd rather leave space for questions, I think, but I think this is an important question to think about, right? When you think about professionalism, when you think about all of the constraints about what professionalism puts in front of you, like ask yourself this, right? And journal about it, or dyad, find someone, right, and dyad with them about it later. But like, what do you need to leave at the door to be professional? Right, and if you're willing to dig deeper into that, then what impact does this have on you? As you step through your work offices, as you step on the campus, as you step into classrooms, in spaces that we assume that you need to be professional in a very small way of what professionalism can be. What do you check at the door? What do you leave there? And what impact does that have on you? What is it like to leave your race and your class and your gender and your sexuality and the struggles that you're having at home, or the struggles that you have with your own health, or any of those struggles that happen beyond the workspace? What's the impact of having to check that at the door and pretend like everything is okay? I think in a lot of ways we think professionalism makes us efficient. And to some degrees it does, but again, I come back to that question of it makes us efficient at what cost? So just think about it, right? Like I said, this is a recap. Professionalism it's the rules that we've been bound to in order to survive in the capitalist world. It's a strategy that we engage in to navigate the world that was not made for most of us. And I really want to separate that. I've hammered this home a bunch of times. I really want to get that out there. Like, professionalism says nothing about you as a person. It says everything about the worlds that we walk through. They give us, professionalism gives us a better glimpse into the ways that our systems are oppressive, and the ways that our workspaces don't make room for a lot of us. But it doesn't say anything about you as a person. Your worthiness doesn't say anything about your intelligence, your skills, your quality of work, or anything of that. Like, professionalism is not yourself, and it is not your identity. It is a practice that we strategically engage in when needed, and it's not something to become. So I want us to kind of end with a little bit of, I don't know, a path forward maybe, but I think we can have an alternative narrative, right? I'm like, I didn't even do that. I don't even know how that works. The world's like, no alternative narrative to professionalism. Like, stop that. But I think an alternative, right? Professionalism, like, what if professionalism wasn't about all of those rules, right? And what if we frame professionalism as showing up in open, honest, and authentic ways that respect our own worthiness, our own boundaries, and our relationships with others? Like, what if that was at the forefront, right? Then we would stop having these conversations about what we should wear, the ways that we should write, and all of that. And we would put at the forefront, like, am I doing harm? Like, what if professionalism, right, was centered on ethics and justice? And to be professional was to not do harm. What if professionalism was to advance equity or to advance justice? Right, and the ways that we would have to do that was we would have to show up fully. I wouldn't have to check everything at the door. I would actually bring some of that in and let those other things that I bring into the room help me connect with other people so that I can see them as full people and build trust with them. And what if we measured professionalism around trust, right? What if we measured it around community building, around our abilities to be open and honest and authentic, and not around our ideas of, can I be the perfect worker? When we center professionalism around these rules and perfection, when we mess up, what happens is we literally just like gaslight people into believing that we didn't make mistakes, because we wouldn't want them to see our mistakes and see us as unprofessional. Right? When you think about that, like, what would happen, right, if people in positions of power would just say, like, yeah, we really messed that up. We realized that what we did caused harm and pain that might not be healed for a long time because of something that we did. Right? Like, what if they could show up in those ways and we could show up in authentic ways? It feels like, from my own perspective, that we would go a lot farther. We would be much more creative. We would be much more innovative. And we would do things that we can't even imagine as possibilities right now, because the boundaries of professionalism don't even allow us to think about those or see those. And I don't mean that in a way of like, we're going to have these like amazing possibilities pop up that bring us lots of money, right? Like, it's not like we're going to become the best workers and the most efficient workers, and we're going to like have creativity and new ideas and things pop out, and we're going to bring in like a whole bunch of capital for us. Like, I mean, like, possibilities about like reorganizing the workplace around joy and around connection and around moving us away from what sociologists call alienation. Like, what would that workplace look like? A lot of us can't even imagine that. And that's not fully tied to professionalism, but I think professionalism is one of those things, right? That if we could redefine it and change our narratives around that, around things like open, honest, and authentic ways that respect our worthiness and our boundaries and relationships with others, we open up possibilities that, like I said, we can't even imagine right now. So I'll leave it at that, and happy to take questions and comments and things like that. All right, if there's no questions, then I think we'll wrap up. I'll hang around if you want to ask questions that aren't like in the big group.